Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. I'm Brett Ween. I'm from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I work in our national headquarters, and I'm the Director of Writing and Entertainment Outreach. And I am so excited to be here with Zach and Charlie here today, and two of our really dedicated and wonderful volunteers, Adia and Robert. If you're not familiar with AFSP, I'll just quickly tell you that it was founded in 1987. It was a group of families who got together with some researchers who wanted to learn more about suicide and how it can be prevented. So we started as a research organization. We're the largest private funder of suicide prevention research. We have support for people affected by suicide, education programs, advocacy. I'm sure I'm forgetting a few hundred other things. The Out of the Darkness walks. And we have local chapters in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. Reach out to one, you'll find a community of people who get it. I myself am a loss survivor. I lost my mom, which is why it's such a personal thing for me. And I thought we'd start out for this great conversation we're about to have about mental health by just going around and introducing ourselves.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Robert Storr, the Board of Directors President for the Greater Los Angeles and Central Coast chapter of AFSP. I too, as Brett mentioned, am a loss survivor, and so I get some of my passion and experience by volunteering with them. And I'll turn to my left here.
My name is Zach Snyder. I'm a filmmaker, and a while ago now, I lost my daughter to suicide, and since then, our family and a lot of my friends and the community in general that sort of surrounds the films that I've made have become really involved in AFSP and in mental health awareness and suicide prevention. So it's been a really amazing opportunity for us to, because I'll be honest, you know, when we were in the midst of everything, AFSP really was this beacon for us as far as, you know, what to do. And because we didn't, you know, we were kind of lost. And it's been, you know, as a resource and as a place of reference, it's been incredibly helpful. And so that's how I got involved in AFSP and sort of working with them on numerous sort of outreaches. We did T-shirts and we'll always do like fundraisers and stuff like that when we can. So, yeah, that's my my experience.
Thank you.
My name's Charlie Hunnam. I am an actor and a writer working in Hollywood. I worked with the great fortune of working with Zach a few years ago, and he invited me to be part of this conversation today, which I'm very grateful for. And I must confess, very, very nervous. I feel a little underqualified, certainly the least educated person sitting at this table, but view my role here as to be sort of curious and to ask some of the questions that I'm interested in asking around this subject matter. I've had two of my very close friends have lost their dear friends to suicide, so I've been you know, certainly touched by this in my own life, and honestly just, you know, had my own struggles over the years with mental health, and been sort of very curious on the subject to learn more and be able to, you know, help my friends when they reach out for help, and to navigate my own mental health in a, you know, in the healthiest way possible. So very excited to be here and just learn as much as possible.
My name is Adia Fadai. I have been with AFSP for the past few years and have been in the mental health space since I was about 14, working at crisis lines, mental health organizations, with 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, and just other sectors of mental health that promote the prevention of suicide. And I love the suicide prevention space. I think it's often thought to be somewhere that's hopeless and dark, but it's actually really somewhere that allows for us to have light and hope and to talk about what I believe is one of the most important questions of life, is just the meaning of it. And so through AFSP, I've been able to get involved with different chapters. I'm just graduated from college, so I was able to get involved with the San Diego chapter as well as the Los Angeles chapter through just different ways, through policy advocacy, through different educational presentations, and other related involvements. I'm very passionate about AFSP, and I know we're all here for similar reasons, and I think that's really unifying. I've also lived with mental health conditions since I was in my adolescence, as well as been through a lot with my friends and family who've navigated the different aspects on the spectrum of suicidality and mental health. So I do feel both that personal lived experience as well as experience working with people affected by these things.
Thank you, everyone. I also want to send a special shout out. Do you send a shout out?
Sure.
Give a shout out? Here's a shout out
You can send it.
to Louisa Roque, who heads up our LA chapter. And she really put this all together, and she's amazing. So we're all very grateful to her, and we're all grateful
Absolutely.
to you, Zach, for everything you've done in the light of your loss, which I'm so sorry about.
Thank you.
I think of my experience with my mom. Being from when I was a little kid, it was the two of us, and she was the funniest person you can imagine. She was almost paradoxically seeming someone who loved life. It was very evident. And she also was suicidal often, and I was her person. And I lost her as an adult. And I'm sort of a comic book nerd, and I have always thought of it since my loss, and particularly after getting involved in this space for AFSP. That's like my superhero origin story. So we can talk about these things they can be very serious, obviously, but we want to make it so that people aren't afraid of talking about it. Mm-hmm. We can talk about it in the same way we talk about physical health. And a bunch of you have sent in questions earlier, and we saw some themes, so we're going to sort of group them up a little bit in terms of theme, and we're just going to have a nice little conversation about it. And thank you all for being here. I'm so excited about this. So just to get started, first of all, we received a bunch of questions that kind of boil down to, and this is general mental health. What do you do? What helps you when you're going through something, when you're having a tough time mentally? For instance, one person wrote in, how can you channel your depression into something positive? Someone wrote, what is a simple pleasure or act that makes you grateful to be alive and to share that life with others? These are all really beautifully put, by the way. And how does creating art, we have some creative people here on our panel, how does creating art, even if it's just for yourself as an outlet or pastime, help you mentally? So I thought we could all, if we're comfortable with it, share kind of what helps us.
Sure.
Yep.
You want me to go first? That sounds great. I guess for me, I found over the course of my life that making movies is a very project-oriented kind of activity. It's chapter-based, but it's also very much like you get excited about something and you have to go all in on it, and you pour your entire self into this thing and you build it. It's like a sandcastle, though, in some ways. You have to also be comfortable with the and weirdly, I do like to build sandcastles. It's like a mandala, if you think about it in those terms. Like you build this beautiful thing, but you can't worry about it being washed away, or it's the act of making it that is really the thing. That's how it is for me, and I think that's where the sort of question about does the creative process or doing something even just for yourself, can that be cathartic, or can that be a thing that makes you feel like you have purpose? And I think that's really what it is for me. Like when I'm writing or drawing or building a sandcastle or making a movie, they're all kind of the same. The activity is the same for me, and really it follows that sort of beginning, middle, and an end concept where at the beginning I'm full of excitement and wonder, it's impossible, or how are we going to do it? There's no chance for us to figure it out, and then you slowly start to put the pieces together, and then it becomes the thing you're doing, where every day you're just doing it, and then in the end you there it is, and it exists, and for me anyway, that's an incredible moment. But what I really feel like people overlook, and I think that is for me the most sort of gives me the most satisfaction, or the most sort of the most healing is the process of making. It's the dirty hands part of it, you know. And I think that is, it can be anything. It can be I would get that experience, that same feeling with my kids when we would be putting Legos together. I would get the same feeling when I'm sitting in a restaurant doodling on a napkin. I get the same feeling, even when I'm reading a book, you know, and sort of imagining the images and all the things that are being told to me when the story's being told, because I'm a participant in the story. So I guess for me, it's like people focus always on the most important thing is, what did you make? Like, what is that? Is it good? Is it smart? Right. Is it like, who cares about that part? I think that for me, it's the dirty hands part of it is really where I feel the most comfortable and in my skin and kind of relaxed, you know. And I think that, so I would encourage anybody and everybody to kind of be conscious of that moment. I think that's the thing that we don't do. We don't, when we're in the midst of building, you know, we always have our eye on what it's going to be rather than like the joy of doing it.
Right. Yeah, that idea, you know, the Albert Camus idea of the myth of Sisyphus, that there is, you know, that idea that Sisyphus was cursed to roll a boulder up a hill every day, this impossible task. And it was too much work for one human being able to do. So you can never get the boulder up, and in the morning, you know, by nighttime, you'd have to let the boulder go and rest and start again. And that idea that would be a curse. But I actually think that, you know, and Camus thinks that that human beings are built for impossible tasks and for incredible and that the sort of the dopamine reaction of getting to one stage of a task and accomplishing it and then getting to the next stage, but that there is no final destination there. So like the idea is we must imagine Sisyphus happy, that, you know, it's just up and doing the task every day. One thing that occurred to me, because I've dealt with periods of depression in my life, and I'm so damn fortunate that like I really got everything I wanted. I have an amazing group of friends. I get to live my dream every day of being an actor and in the filmmaking business. And yet, even when I'm able to dedicate so much of my time and energy into sort of quote unquote positive outlets, I still get these shadows that come over my life. And so that idea of being able to sort of channel depression into something positive is a tricky one, right? Because that is sort of the nature or the definition of depression, that in spite that it's sort of incongruous with maybe what is going on in one's life, things can be going great and still the shadow will come. Mm-hmm. And what I do to remind myself of that, there's a lovely parable in Buddhism, which talks about when the Buddha was on the eve of attaining enlightenment. And enlightenment is enlightenment, to become light, to sort of evolve out of the darkness, which is inherent in all of our lives and the human condition. And so he's on the eve of achieving enlightenment, and Mara comes to visit, who is the personification of profound and abysmal darkness. And right on the eve of gaining enlightenment, Mara comes, and there's this grand battle between light and dark, and the Buddha is triumphant, and light wins, and he becomes enlightened. And a week later, he's, you know, feeling pretty great about life because he's now enlightened, and he's, you know, in meditation underneath the tree, just having a lovely time. And Mara arrives again, and the Buddha's a little bit taken by this for a second. What the heck? Like, this is BS. I'm now enlightened. I shouldn't have to deal with the darkness anymore. He realizes in that moment of enlightenment that the darkness and light are always going to be there. But rather than fighting the darkness, he accepts Mara and invites her to sit and drink tea with him. And after a while, Mara gets frustrated because she's not able to completely wreck his life. And he just sits, and after a while, she says, okay, well, I'll see you in a week. And the Buddha says, okay, thank you. And so that has been so helpful to me in my own mental health journey. When I feel the darkness come, I go, okay, we're gonna sit and drink tea with Mara, and that the sun also rises. That's the greatest lesson that I've found in my own journey, is that it's all somewhat transient, and to have the awareness that you're in a period of darkness, and to create some sort of mechanism to A, understand that it's gonna pass, but B, to just try to navigate it without allowing, or not allowing yourself, that's the wrong way of expressing it, but becoming devoured by it.
Things got deep really, really quickly.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That
I'm
was
I'm that
amazing.
guy.
Oh my
I'm
God.
that guy.
It's all right.
That was beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Okay, good.
Yeah, not surprised, just delighted. That you really brought that. Adia, what works for you?
Totally. Going off of that, I think a lot of our lives are just marked by this avoidance of discomfort, which is totally understandable given our need to survive and our need to stay safe and our proclivities towards doing those things. But in light of what both of you are really speaking on, is that not avoidance of discomfort, but rather allowing that to be a part of our lives, and not wanting that obviously to overtake us as well, but wanting to be okay with what humanity brings and what a lot of the human condition is, which is pain. And I think also we often, and I do this with myself, is over-pathologize ourselves, and we take away from the fact that a lot of things like depression or things like having depressive thoughts or other related experiences are really valid in light of what we go through. And I think a lot of what I do as well, going off what both of you were kind of sharing, is accepting those parts of myself that are dark and being able to work with that, question myself. And we've also talked about being a learner in the process of creating things or asking about things and being open. And I find myself to be a continual learner of myself and of these topics. And so something that has really helped me in my own mental health has been learning about what I'm experiencing. So if I, for example, am experiencing a specific diagnosis, learning about that and understanding it for myself and thinking about those root causes and working with someone. I've been able to have the privilege of working with mental health professionals to help me, but also creating spaces in my life, both within my own journey where I'm journaling and stuff like that, but also with other people, creating spaces where we're able to comfortably talk about those things. I've been able to find such freedom in talking about mental health, such freedom in talking about things like the dark place, and something that we always talk about at the Suicide Prevention Center, where I take hotline calls for the 988 line, is sitting in that dark place with someone. And that's what we've talked about, and that's a beautiful thing. And I think embracing that instead of avoiding it often really allows for some of those times or those thoughts to pass, because instead of doing everything we can to hold on to that and constrict it, we're actually allowing for ourselves to be ourselves, and that's a beautiful thing.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing all that.
I'll jump in with a couple quick shrink tips. So I've been a psychotherapist for 30 years. I like what you're saying. Purpose is really key, and the idea that we go through this on a regular basis. In grad school, I remember them saying, one day you're going to actualize, become who you are. And I'm like, I'm not already who I am. But I find that process goes on. And the idea that when those feelings hit us, if we can look at the fact that there's this concept called emotional congruence. Just because I feel it, my mind is going to start to look for what's wrong. And the reality, there may be nothing wrong, but it's going to go through everything that went wrong in the last couple weeks or last couple months. So you got to remind yourself, your mind is searching for an answer to the feeling. You might be tired, you might be stressed, or there might have been something that hit it off. And the other thing you said, which I think you shared, which was really important, is the idea of connection. One of the things I think we fight against, that's one of our worst enemies, especially for people who are suffering from mental health, is isolation. If I'm not connected, we only need 5 things: food, air, water, shelter, purpose. And we need connection. We have to have strokes. If we don't get strokes from people, we shrivel up. Right. So the ability to connect to people, to reach out. As a therapist, I can be having a really bad day, tired, been working all day, and then all of a sudden somebody will come in that I connect to. As they get to where they're going, I'll get to where I'm going. You know, and I always tell them, you only have to come once a week. I got to do this all the time.
But yeah, isn't there like this really great sort of regenerative power in that? Like when you it's like just as you were saying, that the idea that you're tired, whatever, okay, and then you connect with someone and suddenly like you forget that you're tired, you forget everything. Where like when you relate to them and this sort of experiencing what they're experiencing, suddenly you're like, okay, wow, this shared experience it makes sort of, this is the why of existence. You know, it's really cool because time disappears and
Yep.
you know, you have this amazing
Yeah.
sort of moment that you can like get charged up about. It's cool.
You can feel the energy cooking up around the table, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But community is something that as I get older, I'm just becoming sort of more and more aware of how absolutely essential it is and how difficult it actually is to cultivate and maintain in this modern, crazy world that we've created for ourselves. We have an epidemic of isolation
Yeah, for sure.
in America, and I think probably in most of the world at large. And I think it's very important to be aware of that and to create a structure for oneself and all of our own lives to combat against that. It's one of the I think it's, you know, one of the most perilous things actually about a life in Hollywood is there's so much feast or famine. When you're fortunate enough to be working, you're in this group of interreliant, like-minded people all working together to try to achieve you know, mutual goal, and then that ends and you go back and sit alone, and usually we have to travel for work, so during that absence from our life, a lot of the connections can go fallow, and then you have to come back and sort of rebuild life again, and that can be really difficult from a place of isolation.
Yeah, it's hard to be a non-consistent friend, you know, like if you're like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, it's so great to see you, I'll see you in a year. You know, that's not an awesome,
Yes, yeah.
it's not an awesome friend, but that's like the life that we have a lot. So it is, community is so important. And also a community that's like sort of non-judgmental, you know, that's not saying like, well, I didn't see you for 6 months, so you know, screw you.
Right.
You know, it's nice when you see a true friend, if it's been a year or 5 years, there's like this, it's suddenly you can pick up immediately where you left off, and it's beautiful. And that's, I think for me, it's always, that's how I know that like, yeah, that was real, like when I saw them before, anyway.
That's presumably something that you come up with consistently. Is that a fair assumption? Isolation exacerbating mental health issues with people that you
Yes,
help?
absolutely. Yeah, I saw it coming out of the pandemic. I mean, I could feel it at first, and I was trying to figure out what it was. Everybody locked away in their own isolation, and I first started looking at like a pandemic hangover, because we've been so separated for so long, and how odd it felt for us to break through and be in groups and start to connect again. Definitely, and I see it all around LA and where we are. We're not in small towns. We're not walking around, shopping in the same stores, necessarily seeing people and finding relationships. When I met both of you right away, Zach and Charlie, and the fact that you were so vulnerable right away made the connection really easy. I started thinking, do you guys get that, you know, where you are and in your work? I work with a lot of people in entertainment, and what I learned was you are job to job sometimes, and so it is sort of, it's partialed out. They're there, and then you're not, and then you're there. And I didn't realize that as an outsider going in, how difficult that might be in terms of being there. But I appreciate that you take the opportunity to reach out, you know, and that you both are here to do the work.
Well, I have Debbie and Wes, and you know, I have like, and the whole family. Like I bring the community with me wherever I go. So I've been really fortunate in that way, because the support system of the family is so important. And when you have everyone together, you know, it's you know, you're like a little tribe that goes around, and it's incredible. So that I'm really thankful for, because they really are amazing.
So do we have any advice, though, for people maybe at home that are struggling to cultivate a community around them, like some ways in which that can be made easy?
That's a good question. Well, if you're not living in a small town, what I always recommend is find an organization in your area. Sometimes I tell people, if you haven't found it yet, make sure you're at least getting out of the house and being where people are, because that alone will connect you. Especially introverts, people who are not necessarily shy, but they're inwardly directed. They're comfortable being alone. So you have to break that comfort zone of staying alone, because you don't realize that does begin to wear and can turn into depression. So the idea is, if you can find an organization and it feels artificial to people, or reaching out to friends that you haven't reached out to, but you do have to cultivate it, because it's not natural, because we're not connected as we get older, to churches or our kids' schools or other organizations. AFSP, in fact, is a great community in terms of how getting to meet you, Zach, and working with people. I've worked a lot with people who are survivors like us who've lost someone to suicide. And this community, which people always say is something I never wanted to belong to, but I'm so happy I found, is an incredible example of people who suffer with a protracted period of grief because it's associated with trauma. And this is the only place I think that most of them come because the world doesn't really want to make time for grief. And in fact, I have 4 brothers, and one of them said to me at one point, "Aren't you over that by now?" And I'm just kind of like, let me tell you about protracted grief from a therapeutic standpoint.
Cool.
But when people come together, there's an actual process that continues. But even beyond that, it's where you're finding community. And I work with actors sometimes, and I'm like, do you have organizations you can belong to? Or, but I think going to classes and finding that. But I like what you're saying in terms of cultivating friends, and I like that you create community. It's a responsibility, and I think it's a necessity to good mental health.
Out of the Darkness walks are incredible when everyone comes together and you see everyone, and it's like really this really incredible kind of sense of community. It's like you said about like how that's the, like you would think, you know, sort of the idea of like belonging to that community seems like, oh geez, how do I like, you know, but at the same time, it's an incredible, like we've met a lot of people, you know, through those walks that are, you know, there because they not necessarily, you know, had a direct relationship to suicide, but that their own mental illness or their own mental struggles have caused them to say like, wow, that's a community where there's support, you know? And I think that's incredible, you know, to be able to just come out and they're so welcoming, incredibly welcoming group, you know, they're just like, oh, come on, let's go, you know, it's just, which is really, really beautiful.
Yeah, and I remember when I was a survivor, I got invited to what they call International Survivors of a Suicide Loss Day. I looked at that and closed the email right away. So I'm not going to go where we're going to talk about that. Now, you know, I've facilitated 6 of them. It's like Harry Reid started it because his father died of suicide. It's every Saturday after Thanksgiving, and you bring everybody together. And in LA, there's several of them. You get 120 people together who've lost parents, children, spouses, brothers, sisters, and you guide them through a day where they get a chance to really develop a community, even for a day. And there's a communal education, grief process, and sort of a celebration of the people. And it's incredible to see that you can do that. I would have never believed it, but then I'm a skeptic till I see it happen. But it is good that people can find that. It's important.
I'll just say, I think connection's different for everyone, and maybe this is the Virgo in me talking, but I find setting up ways of being organized about seeing people regularly. It could be you set up, come up with a reason, set up a book club. Shout out to KBC, Kick-Ass Book Club. They're gonna love that. And I also want to say my own response to, you know, what helps if you're, you know, having a tough time with your mental health, whether it's anxiety or what you need to get out of your head a little bit. I was going to say music, but what you were sharing, Zach, about art and building sandcastles made me change my answer, which is that, you know, before I worked at AFSP, I performed and taught improv at the People's Improv Theater.
Oh, that's cool.
And I remember when I was first taking classes and, you know, being in practice groups and all that, that was a time in my life where my mom at times was calling me, you know, any moment, any day could be a sudden, like, I need you to come home to Pennsylvania, or, you know, whatever it was, or like, I don't feel good, Brett. And knowing that I was in that space, making something up on stage, on the spot, that to me was the most powerful thing I've ever experienced in terms of getting out of my own head, because it's all about actively listening and reacting, and also you're building all these new mental muscles. So I think everyone should take an improv class. That's just me, for a million other reasons too. But I want to get to.
I think it's
were
great.
you about to say something?
No, I was just appreciating the improv class and wanting to like see you do a little improv.
Well,
That's what I'm doing right now.
You're doing great, by the way. So.
That's good to hear. And I want to get to the next. We have a few more sets of questions. This is such a rich conversation that I'm so grateful. We also heard from people who have lost friends and loved ones to suicide. One person writes in, 2 years ago, I lost my friend. How do we help prevent suicide for friends going through a severe and uncurable illness? I want to double click on one word in that, uncurable. Mental health, we all have it, just like we have physical health. And a mental illness can be, dealt with and managed just as any physical health thing can be. And you can have a mental illness or have different challenges with mental health from time to time, and you can still live, a really rich, satisfying, awesome life. Another person writes in, my son died by suicide 8 years ago. I don't know how to get past my guilt. What did I miss? And suicide affects so many people. Guilt is one of those. There are many emotions. Any emotion you're feeling is reasonable and nothing to feel shame over. And guilt, if you've lost someone to suicide, guilt is not. It's easy for me to say, stop feeling guilty, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I guess, do any of you want to talk a little bit about that?
You want to start that one?
No,
I mean,
you
I
go.
don't.
Okay, so I
Let's
used
hear
to
from the expert.
I used to direct the Suicide Prevention Center because after my partner died, after 2 years of trying to get myself off the couch and do something other than lay on the couch, watch TV, and eat something out of a box, which was depression, and thank you for being vulnerable about it, because I used to wonder what it was. I went to the Suicide Prevention Center and I was working with groups for attempt survivors and loss survivors. And the first thing I found out were loss survivors, and I'm a loss survivor, and I know you are as well, several of us are, you include, Brett, is that people felt like they were going crazy. Because all of these things, when you have grief associated with trauma, it's not just like grief anymore. It becomes a whole set of experiences mentally and emotionally that are different. It affects you physically on all sorts of levels. I think I was sleeping 2 hours a night. I wasn't responding to things in the same way I used to at first. And then I started working on it. And talk about community, small groups of people getting together and understanding they were going through this process and beginning to unwind it. And the first thing everybody was saying, what did I miss? Why didn't I know? I shoulda, woulda, coulda, was standard. That's a standard grieving process for anybody, but especially for somebody who dies from suicide, because it leaves behind us who thinks this is a preventable mental health condition. How come we didn't know? And the reality is we all didn't know because we are still just getting to the point of talking about it. And even understanding, I was a therapist for 30 years when my partner died. I should have known, right? There's no way this was the man who was the life of every party, drove motorcycles, was gregarious, never said a bad thing. He never disclosed any of it. But when I did a retrospect after he died, I could see there were all sorts of things that were happening that I wasn't cued into because I didn't have the language and the experience. So post-suicide, you suddenly understand, and that's, I think, what people want to know, is it may be 2020 looking back, but it's not 2020 at the time. And every individual is different. It's a very complex mental health condition, which may be different components for every different person. Maybe biochemical on some levels, certainly it's untreated mental health, maybe some hereditary factors we don't know about, maybe some neurological conditions they're finding that predispose it in certain areas of the brain, maybe some early childhood trauma that we don't know, or trauma for the military, which is twice the rate, has trauma associated with their combat. Certain minority communities like the LGBTQ community, because of the prejudice and bias, are about 10 times more likely. So there's crisis factors, societal factors, but a lot of complex. So I just say people have to really forgive themselves and say, I am grieving it, so I am going to ask those questions and ask them, but don't expect yourself to ever come up with the answer. You can guess, you can hypothesize, but even the experts, the medical experts, I worked with people who were so frustrated with the psychiatrists and psychologists that saw their child or their parent, people that worked with, a woman that worked with her parent over and over on a regular basis knew she had mental health issues, but no way was she aware that she was going to die by suicide. It's just not something we would ever expect, nor could we. It's not like heart disease where you go in and they said, yep, you're overweight, you have high blood pressure, you have a history of heart disease, we're going to check you every time you come in, make sure your cholesterol's under control, you're losing your weight, your heart's functioning okay. We don't do that yet. You know, we're starting to get there. But so if you're surviving, you're going to go through that process, you know, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Denial is really sort of a shock. Anger and frustration, depression, how did I miss this? Eventually, I don't think acceptance is, you know, I accept this, but it's some level of peacemaking after a period of time. And then you're going to be like you, Zach, and everybody at this table, where you're going to try to make meaning. Or if you choose, you're going to turn that tragedy, and you, Charlie, being here, turning the tragedy into something that is meaningful and makes a difference. Because I say the past has no real reference on the present unless it's something you can use in your present to make a difference rather than hold you back.
That's cool. Yeah, the thing I was going to say, the only thing I was going to say, the thing with Autumn that was interesting was that of course, I had that same reaction, this reaction of like, how did I miss, what did I do wrong? And until for me anyway, once I started to realize in her writing and in her, because she was a very quiet person, but in her writing and in retrospect, you could see that from her point of view, the battle was really real. Mm-hmm. And the battle was really like a real, like, raging war that she was in. And, you know, she's quiet, so you're like, oh, she's fine or whatever, but she was in a real battle. And I think the scale of it obviously was massive. And it's hard. Of course, we're like, oh, you know, like, what did I do wrong? But I think that when you realize that from their point of view, you're really a very small aspect of the war that they're in, you know?
Like, it's not about you.
Yeah, it's not about you, really,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, and
Good
I guess
point.
it was a thing that she had written this book, and in reading the book, which is a book of fiction, you could see so clearly in the characters and in sort of the way she laid out the story that it was very much a metaphor in a lot of ways for this massive battle that she was going through. And because she was so quiet and so so deeply interwoven with this struggle, in a lot of ways, I feel like our projection of wanting to be the savior is also we had very little effect on the war that was happening.
Excellent point. Yeah, very, very much so. And the weird thing, suicide prevention began in LA. They didn't think there was prevention prior to the 50s. It was a late start, and the only way they figured it out was a couple of veterans. And they studied suicide notes at the VA here in LA, and they had them manufacture notes that weren't real notes. You know what the difference was? The suicide notes contained this: they didn't want to die, they were struggling to live. And so the reality is that's the first time they figured out it was preventable.
That was the real notes.
Yeah.
Had that. Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
The artificial notes didn't, and that's when they discovered the ambivalence and figured if we could figure out how to help the people. But you're right, the war isn't about us, and it's been going on a long time. And the people who are suffering from it don't know how to disclose it until we make the effort, like you did the other day, Charlie, to reach out to somebody who may be suffering that you see. And that takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's wonderful about what you're doing here and cultivating an ability for people to have just open and honest and conversations without shame or any stigma to it. Because the thing is, we all have mental health, and sometimes, just like our physical health, sometimes it's great and we're going to the gym and we're, you know, eating right and sleeping well, and sometimes, you know, things start to slide and we find ourselves, you know, with a little bit of a gut. It's the same with mental health, and to just create in society a more robust and open dialogue. I started to talk about my mental health just the way I would talk about, I put on a few pounds, and almost like have, you know, not a levity about it, but just an ease about talking about it. And when I was able to do that, I mean, I remember my mental health journey started when I was about eight or 9 years old, I was walking through the kitchen of my house and I suddenly realized I was like really buoyant and happy. And that, for no reason, and that brought an awareness. And I realized, oh, I haven't felt like this in months. And had then a moment of panic, and my buoyancy sort of evaporated pretty quickly, and went, oh, there might be a slight problem here. That, you know, there might be some sort of, I don't think I phrased it like this, chemical imbalance, but I've learned over time that being able to talk about it and put words to it, and that began even with just a dialogue with myself. And so now I am sort of sensitive to this and try to cultivate courage, and it really does require courage to actually, when I see friends struggling, when I see friends with an addiction, which I think is also a manifestation of mental health issues, where people are using substance to try to ameliorate the pain that they're going through. And I've unfortunately dealt with a lot of people in my life that have suffered from addiction issues, some of which it cost them their lives, people very, very close to me. And so to just have the courage to try to create a space to have that conversation is really important. And like you said, I look around, I started to go to the gym recently again, and I look around and it feels like it's like we're all there doing the same thing and having the same experience. And I do a smile test, you know, every time I go, where I'll smile at the first 10 people and just count how many people will smile back. And I gotta say, honestly, it's often zero. You know? Everybody has their earphones in. It's almost like we live in this society which, you know, if a stranger smiles at you or tries to engage in contact, they're probably crazy. But I think we need to stop approaching each other that way. So yeah, I saw a gentleman, and I actually have seen him since we spoke last time, and asked him if he would mind if I spoke about that on this, and he said he would be delighted to, because he is actually, once we engaged in the conversation very specifically about what was going on, is very courageous and eager to talk about his mental health issues. But I just saw a gentleman in the gym who seemed like he was having a hard time, and asked him just point blank, "Are you doing okay today?" And he said, "No, I'm really, really not." And so we've started to have a fairly frequent conversation about it. And all I do is literally don't say anything as much as possible and just give him an opportunity to talk to me.
Took me 30 years to learn that part about not saying a lot.
I want to give a shout out also. I mean, you're all sparking so many things for me. Knowing how to have those conversations, because so many people want to, whether it's just, you know, everyday mental health or specific, you know, situations where you're worried about someone or you need help yourself. We have at AFSP the Real Convo guides that give you guidance so you feel confident about it. It's part of our Talk Away the Dark campaign. We'll provide the links later. What I wanted also to say about suicide loss. No, Zach, we're not ready for that
They're
yet.
not down here.
No, and by the way, in the spirit of improv, I realized I skipped over one of the questions.
Oh, it's been amazing. I don't even know.
I was just going to say, in terms of loss, on the one hand, yeah, we can all play a role in keeping our friends and family members safe by learning the common risk factors and warning signs. No one ever takes their life for a single reason, the research shows. We might think it does. We might say, oh, it's because, you know, her husband left her or he lost his job. But in fact, it's usually a perfect storm of a few different risk factors overtaking your, you know, normal, you know, your regular coping strategies. So on the one hand, we can learn what those risk factors are and how to have a conversation about it. But on the other hand, you know, sometimes people are good at hiding their warning signs. And so that's why guilt is, you know, not something I think it's very, very normal to feel that after a loss. But yeah, and now I want to move on if you're ready.
Can I
I was
add
gonna
something?
say,
please do, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
you work
you.
the crisis line. You tell
Yes,
us what
please.
you do.
I was going to speak a little bit on that. When you call 988, I'm one of those people who answers the phone, and we've had comprehensive training, so don't worry, we do know how to handle crisis calls for anyone in mental health crisis, substance use crisis, and or suicidal crisis, as well as if you are worried about a loved one, which is a really important resource to know. You're able to call or text 988, not just on behalf of yourself, but on behalf of someone else. You're not alone. Often we believe that there is a lot of burden placed upon us, whether that's internally placed or externally placed, for us to be like these saviors. But really there is a lot of support out there, and we can tap into those resources. We're not alone in supporting others in their mental health journeys. And there are resources and organizations in place that have those places of expertise, just like when you are going to the doctor. You go to the doctor because you know that they're able to help you in a way that you're not able to help yourself or your friend. If my friend was talking to me about a physical health issue, I could tell them only so much, but then I would direct them to something like a physician. And so similarly, we must do that with mental health. Also, going off of what we were saying about comfortability talking, when I talk to people on the crisis line, that's something I feel very comfortable doing, because at this point I talk about suicide all the time, openly, comfortably, and that's just where I'm at in my comfortability. And just also noting that everyone is different, everyone is in a different place of their journey. Some people might be really open and comfortable and equipped to have those conversations, and some people might not want to touch those conversations at all. So being sensitive and meeting people where they're at, but also creating those safe spaces. People talk about their suicidality openly at 988 because they know that that is the space that has been provided for them to be able to have those conversations. Whereas if I'm in school, I am 21 years old, and when I'm talking to people my age, it's unlikely that they're just going to disclose their suicidality. As well as in common conversations when we talk to people, if someone talks about their suicidality in an open way, often that's met with alarm. So that stops people from reaching out. And so when we talk about suicide and actually allow for people to talk about it in a way, the majority of people who are affected by suicide have suicidal ideation, and suicidality is a spectrum. So you can be anywhere from wanting to die, but also wanting to live, and that's the suicidal ambivalence that's been psychologically theorized and found in evidence of research that to be true, but also to the other side of that spectrum where someone is in a place of imminent crisis. And so also noting the complexity of that spectrum, noting the complexity of where people fall on that spectrum, and also allowing for people to say, like our loved ones, hey, I'm actually wanting to die, but I also want to live, and I want to talk about it, and not just having a really alarming reaction that stops someone or silences someone. So I think those are really important things to know. And of course, if you have lost someone, showing yourself compassion and grace as well. We're really limited, finite beings, and we can do what we can. And there are definitely aspects and elements of suicide that are preventable, but it is also a really complex issue, and we must treat that with grace. And I think a beautiful way of allowing ourselves to sit in that is also through understanding suicide and trying to do what we can to understand it. There is a lot of psychological research, sociological research. There's been a lot of philosophy and literature that has spanned decades, as well as history, talking about suicide and what that looks like for communities, what that looks like for people. And for me, I've spoken earlier about how learning about suicide has really helped be a protective factor for me. So even if that's reading literature, like philosophy, you noted a philosopher like Myth of Sisyphus. That's a great way of being able to support yourself. I've read a lot of literature, such as Sylvia Plath, who we often miss those parts of suicide that aren't just through the lens of psychology, through the lens of a clinical one, of people who've really experienced things, learning about the history of suicide, and really tapping into that. Again, though, noting that everyone's at a different space, and really allowing ourselves to give ourselves grace and others compassion in the midst of the difficulty that is this topic in reality.
It's interesting because, like, do you think that this is for you guys? Like, a lot of times I think people, their reaction can be because, like, there's always this such the giant stigma around suicide, in that it, like, if a stranger or someone you don't know well is broaching that subject, and you're like, oh geez, like, not that, is it going to rub off on me, or like, what is like what is my relationship now to this?
Right.
I'm being dragged into this. Like, how now am I vulnerable for the same? Do you think that has anything to do with people's hesitancy to talk about
You're right on with that, Zach. I think people are afraid of two things, sort of a myth that if I talk about it, it's going to make it worse.
There it is.
If I talk about it, am I now responsible? So that's why I applaud you, Charlie, on your courage. And you said it so beautifully about the grace, and then also using 988 as a resource. It's just so important for people to know you don't have to be the expert,
Right.
but if you see somebody struggling and you could be the invitation. I used to run groups for attempt survivors. People are like, well, these were people who actively wanted to die by suicide. What I would remind people is they didn't really want to die by suicide, they were struggling to live. If you can get them to the right resource, they're going to make it. But they only got there because they tried to die and they managed to survive somehow. That's a rather miraculous event. And I liked what you said about giving yourself grace, because as much training as I have, as much knowledge as I have, we cannot always save people. But if they call the crisis line, about 90% of the time you can de-escalate the call and get them to the right treatment. So anybody who's worried about someone, if you pick up the phone and dial 988, you can be connected to someone like you with the grace to give them that information and support them. Thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful.
And I think what you were saying is such a valid concern. Sometimes when we get what's considered a third-party caller, so someone who's calling on behalf of someone else, we ask them, so what's your relationship to this person that you're talking to or talking about? And how far do you want to go necessarily? Some people, they are willing to take someone to emergency services and kind of go all the way in that capacity, and some people just want to hand some resources. So I think questioning ourselves of where we stand with that is super important, and also equipping us in ways that will make ourselves feel better in case that comes up. So, with mental health first aid and getting trained there, psychological first aid, assist trainings, other suicide prevention trainings, that are like reducing access to lethal means, stuff like that, super important. And AFSP has a lot of resources, but I think checking in on ourselves and seeing where we stand in relation to helping others so that we are able to help them, but in a way that protects ourselves as well, and kind of is mirroring that clinical empathy, which is instead of enmeshment and being intermingled with someone's pain in a way that brings us down, is being able to have self-other differentiation and being able to identify where you stand, where the other person stands, and having an empathy that is able to be helping rather than hurting ourselves.
Zach, what got you connected to AFSP and gives you the continued motivation?
What got me connected?
Yeah,
Well,
and how did you find this?
It was literally just, when we were, dealing with Autumn, it's the first thing you find, So I thought, that's how, and then from there, as we went forward, we just wanted to support the resource, as much as possible because it's so valuable, and that wherever the person is on their journey, that if they could connect to, a professional like you, the outcome could be changed, and that, like, if you see someone drowning, what do? Do you throw them a life preserver, or do you jump in yourself? It's like a first responder's mindset in some ways.
Yeah.
And I think that's an incredibly admirable sort of position to take in your perspective on the world, because it means that whatever you see, as far as danger, and in this case, from suicide specifically, you have a skill set that allows you to swim out to them, and that's a cool thing.
Well, thank you for reaching out and bringing that forward.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Honor. My experience is that it can be quite overwhelming, because one has a sense of enormous responsibility that all of a sudden somebody's life is in your hands, because if you're the sole person that they're talking to, it's a hop, skipping a jump to take that responsibility onto yourself. My experience is that, in my very limited experience, is just showing up and I have no answers and no real insight to be able to offer, just empathy and an open heart to be able to listen and show that at least one person cares. But what I would love, and I know it was one of the questions we were going to talk to about later, but maybe we can segue into it now, is just, would you have any advice if that responsibility feels too too daunting or too high of a risk, how you would create the conversation about offering help to somebody that needs help, because that's also a rather delicate process, presumably, to advocate for somebody else to reach out to a third party.
Well, I want to give a little shout out to, there's a wonderful AFSP program called Finding Hope, Guidance for Supporting Someone at Risk. So that can give you a lot of advice. You can always, we're talking about calling 988, not as the person who's struggling, but if you're not sure how to respond to someone who is, you can call up 988 or text them and they will give you advice as well.
Okay.
And I would say, don't keep it to yourself. For whatever reason, I often think of teenagers in a situation where one of them says, hey, I need to tell you something, but you're not allowed to tell anyone.
Right.
And then what is that other teenager supposed to do? And the answer is you want to be respectful of your friend, but if you think that their life is in danger or, you have to just trust your gut. It is okay to tell a parent or a trusted adult. And that same situation occurs for adults too. And it's don't keep it to yourself. I think a lot of the time we think of the person struggling as being the one who feels very alone. But from my personal experience and many others, the people who love them and support them, it's not like my mom had heart disease or cancer, in which case we would have a community of people coming together to make sure she's going to the doctor and offering encouragement and support. Often when it comes to someone at risk for suicide or mental health, the person supporting them feels alone. So again, you could reach out to your local AFSP chapter. We'll have all the links. People get it there.
Don't make me start pointing again.
You can put whenever.
The first part of me always goes, and this took me a long time to learn, so I have empathy for anybody, is like, I have to say it out loud. I'll still say it to clients, is like, I'm not responsible. I can't change your life. I can't do it. And it's none of my business, by the way, because I have to respect that individual. Even when you deal with someone who's suicidal, you can't tell them, don't kill yourself, because they'll shut you down right away. That sometimes might be their thought that that's an option. I don't want you to die by suicide. And these are trained people, like on the crisis line, and I'm going to do everything I can to talk to you about it. But anybody who's listening, we cannot save a life. We can do our best to get them to resources. When I was doing the group with attempt survivors, these were people who actively wanted to die, and some of them fresh out of the hospital. And I thought, well, what am I going to do at 5 o'clock when I leave? And what I did was I called 988 and I put them on the phone so they could talk to volunteers, so I could remind them that that's 24/7. Anytime you need help, crisis intervention is here. That's not me. I can't do that. So I think that important piece, that safety net is there, is really critical. But it's got to start here with knowing that if you lost somebody, you couldn't have saved them. If you're working with somebody, you can't be responsible. You can offer help, which I think is brilliant. And then you can remind them, this is the best I can do, and here's some resources that I want to give you.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Beautiful.
That was wonderful. Thank you all for your comments and everyone who sent in these questions. So I think we covered.
Yeah, we did. We actually got that one too.
Yeah. So I want to move on. Another sort of cluster of questions thematically was people with lived experience and with personal struggles with mental health. For instance, we have one, someone wrote in, I always feel like I'm trying to catch up to the world around me. Everybody I know has accomplished so much more than I have. I feel left behind and insignificant, even though I'm working hard to achieve my goals. What can I do to combat these feelings? Someone else wrote in, I continually struggle with imposter syndrome in the workplace and feeling I'm not good enough despite really positive feedback from my colleagues. That's a good reminder that what's going on, in here is not necessarily reflective of what's actually happening. I'm really hard on myself when I get things wrong, and it can send me down a downward spiral. How can I break this way of thinking? So what does that spark?
I suddenly feel like an expert now sitting at the table.
Good. That's the whole thing. Like the real convo about having this conversation is like I want to break through that feeling of like we can't talk about it because we don't know the exact way. It's just about starting the conversation and listening.
Right. I blame the advertisers. I think somewhere in the 40s or 50s, the modern American advertising figured out the trick that if we could tell people that they weren't enough, and if they just got this Rolls Royce, all of a sudden they'd feel like their life was enough, or they'd achieved enough, or that they were worthy or valuable. And I think we've all fallen into this trap. There's a very successful therapist in Los Angeles who's become the sort of go-to therapist of the stars. I mean, every Oscar winner and everybody goes to this guy. He's got a very, very impressive list of clients. And on the Monday morning after the Oscars, he always clears his books because he knows he's going to get a bunch of calls of people just utterly panicked, thinking, I don't know how to get through the day. And it's not from the ones who lost.
Right.
It's the ones who won their Oscar. And they suddenly woke up on Monday morning after a 50-year campaign to think, I'll be enough if I get this gold statue, if I'll finally feel like I'm in the winner's circle. And they win, and they don't feel any different. And now they're in utter turmoil and panic.
Yeah, that's a good abyss, because that's really their.
And I think we all just deal with that, right, on a daily basis of like how that is sort of the struggle of life, particularly in this modern world of how do we feel like we're enough? How do we feel like our contribution is enough? How do we feel like we're rising to the level of our potential? I think the idea of failing to rise to the level of our perceived potential is a great engine of happiness. I get the sense that there is this other that's developing more and more as a sort of a psychological consequence of this modern life of comparing ourselves to this perfect avatar of ourselves that we can never quite reach. I read once some great advice: compare yourself not to who someone else is today, but to who you were yesterday. That I think about a lot in terms of, you know, maybe if I'm just on this journey to becoming more the person that I want to be, incrementally, little by little, not judging it from the outside lens, but from this really internal, kind, loving, empathetic lens to yourself that, like, listen, if you just can get through this little, you know, this little journey step by step to where you think, you know, your highest ideal would be. But I suppose what I'd say to everybody listening, that if they suffer from that, is that we all, I think, deeply suffer. I've had the benefit of being in the orbit or being exposed to people working at the absolute highest level of entertainment and sports, and they all don't feel like they're enough. They all are just getting up at, you know, a little earlier every day, thinking if I can just score that extra touchdown, if I can just, you know, make $700 million with my next movie at the box office, I'll be enough. And, you know, I think that just has to be a cultivated relationship with how you feel about yourself, because there's nothing from the external world, I don't think, that's ever actually going to make you feel like you're enough. You just have to know that you are, that we're all just these strange little slivers of God having this human experience, you know, and the experience is the thing,
It is the thing.
And of all of these experiences that we're here to enjoy and experience, love is the one at the top of the mountain. So if you want to feel like you're enough, I think try to cultivate as much love in your life with your cat and with your friends. And if you're lucky enough to have a partner in the world, and your parents, and, you know, the person who checks you out at the grocery store, just love as much as you possibly
Yeah,
can.
because really that's it. That's
Yep.
it. Like if you think there's something else, there's,
Right.
you know, don't search too hard, because it feels good. That's it.
Right,
You know,
Yeah.
And now
love. I mean, you know.
yeah.
we now know that Charlie is apparently a cat person and not a dog person.
I would say Charlie missed his call.
He's really revealing. He's revealing stuff.
Gotta listen deeply to these things, to what people are trying to tell you. I actually want to, in terms of the people who wrote in about their personal struggles with mental health, I actually was just watching a movie, and I'll give it a recommendation for it because I doubt anyone's really heard of it. It's called Rebel Moon.
Oh, yeah.
It's actually in 2 parts.
It's pretty good.
There was a quote actually that leapt out at me, and I'm gonna share that quote if that's
Okay,
all right.
sure.
Without giving anything away, there's a moment.
It'd be cool if it was a spoiler, so that'd be awesome.
Yeah, the part where so-and-so dies.
Sorry, go ahead.
There's a moment where there are villagers who are ashamed that they need this rebel band of heroes to help them and to help protect them. And one of the heroes says something, I think, very deep that maybe applies to this, which is to swallow their pride to even ask for help is bravery itself.
Beautiful.
And I just thought that was a beautiful moment, and it kind of speaks to
Oh,
how
for someone
story-
who's feeling like I'm not brave, can you help me? It's like you just did it.
yeah.
You just did it.
And
Yep.
it's so hard. It's so easy to say, like, if you're struggling, talk to someone, ask for help. One of the Real Convo guides is actually specifically about that, because it's easy for us to say that, but if you're the one who's struggling and you need help, picking up the phone or talking to someone, even if it's someone really close to you, can be really hard. You have to do that. And it doesn't matter how you say it. I think when people are in that situation, they probably are rehearsing almost a script in their head as to how they might ask for help or tell someone that they're struggling that deeply. They might be someone who no one would suspect.
Well, don't you think that the physical act of saying, like, I'm struggling with this issue is, in our world, basically say, I failed. Like, I didn't, I'm not awesome.
Perfect, yeah.
Right, and I'm not perfect. Apparently, like everyone else seems to be, but I'm
Right.
not. So
That's the big
I
reason.
said it out loud, and now what? And I think that's it. Then you're like, well, if what we've revealed is that so many people feel those feelings, you're actually joining in the community, not separating yourself from it
Yes.
by saying that.
It's a strong thing to do.
It's a strong thing to do, exactly.
It's a responsible
the opposite
thing to
of what
do.
you think it is, yeah.
It's you're being a badass if you ask for help. Seriously.
No, literally.
I tell people it's a small miracle. People have no idea what's inside them till you go through a tragedy or a trauma, or you get to the other side and you start to find out who you are, and you start to evolve. I think you become so much more. I found it in myself and I see it in people. So when someone comes in to see me, I'm like, it's a small miracle you're here, that you had the courage to ask, and watch. Don't limit yourself about who you think you are based on where you are today, because so much more is going to happen, and you're going to evolve through that process. But they don't get that at the time. I just feel like I need the help.
Well, we spoke about that moment in Rebel Moon that I think was evocative of so much more than just the surface level of that story, and that's what great writing does and what great art does. Since we have some artistically minded people here on this panel, we got some questions that involve art. So I thought we would jump to that now.
Sure.
This is, as the director of writing and entertainment outreach, this is a thing that's really fascinating to me, because I remember being a little kid, and all through my life, both my mom and I, even just a line in a TV show or a movie, let alone a whole storyline that involved mental health or suicide, it told us how to feel, whether it was a positive thing or a negative thing. So these stories are incredibly powerful. So one of these questions, for instance, is, as an aspiring filmmaker, I took to heart the quote of yours that says, "Powerful art can heal and bring change." I think that's to you, Zach. But sometimes I consider my situation and the material conditions of my third world country and wonder if any form of art that could get made here, and it's hard, as you might imagine, is truly powerful enough to touch the hearts of anyone here, let alone make any concrete change. Any words of encouragement? Another person wrote in, "What role can storytelling and narrative-based approaches play in making mental health discussions more relatable and accessible to communities with diverse cultural backgrounds?" Those are some
Well, I would say
pretty good questions.
just my knee jerk to the idea that, and of course, resources are a huge part of the privilege that we have to make movies, and we have cameras and all the things. But I do believe in my heart that, like, some of the greatest art I've ever seen and experienced is art that's raw and real and comes from the human experience and sort of shines a light on that experience. That's really where the rubber hits the road, as far as I'm concerned, of like a profound artistic relationship, the sort of, where the I is destroyed by the thing that you observe, like where the ego is, like you no longer exist for a second, and when you're looking at the thing, the viewer and the object are the same, and it's, and you don't think about like, oh, I want to buy that, or I want to like, I want to like, it doesn't make you want to fight or flight or anything. It just, you melt. Yeah, and I think that whether that's a sunset or the Grand Canyon or a painting or a photo you saw or something, there's always that moment where you forget, and I think that has a little to do with resources, and it really has to do with truth, and I think that to me is really, and I don't think it's also a thing you try to do, you know what I mean? Like that to me is a thing you do just in doing, and also it's not a thing that's 100% reliant on skill set or training, and a lot of times just truth comes from truth. And it's been my experience sort of just in sort of living, with art as our kind of main thing that we try and, have this, back and forth with, that always struggling for that sort of, you can't manufacture aesthetic arrest, but you can be open to it. And when you feel it, sort of make sure you acknowledge that it's happening, like you walk through a museum and, or even walk down the street and see some beautiful street art or whatever, and you have that where you're stopped and you're like, oh my gosh, okay, that's
great.
Beautiful and profound. And I think that so that, I guess what I'm saying is that like how that affects everyone is the same, like that goes back to community for me, because like really art can then, because of its ability to kind of obliterate your ego and your experience and your troubles and like everything for a moment, that's a thing that can really be, reconnect you to the world. I think that's an amazing, has that amazing ability. That was a rant, and I have no idea if it means anything.
That was,
It was great.
Good connection.
yeah, that was wonderful. One thing that has become sort of a mantra for me, it was a little bit of an epiphany in working with the entertainment industry, is that I think people think that there are some stories that involve mental health, and then there are, just normal stories or regular stories. Here's my thing, here's my thesis, it's my rallying cry. All stories are about mental health.
Yeah.
If your story involves a human character or even an alien that has some sort of a brain-like thing, that's mental health, and we're watching that. And of course, some stories are, specifically about a mental health crisis, but I think art has the power to transcend and show people also that anything you might be thinking or feeling, I'm sorry, but you ain't that original. Someone else has thought of it and felt it, and you're not alone.
Yeah, beautifully said, Brett. I've always thought of entertainment, specifically what we do in film and television making, is having two distinct functions. One is to be a distraction and some sort of, positive emotional manipulation that can help balance out a bad day, help you forget your problems. And then the other function, which is, I don't think any more or less important, because I think offering just a distraction from the toils of the day is really valuable, gift that we can, as filmmakers, offer to the world. But storytelling in itself is can be a lens through which human beings observe themselves and learn a great deal. And I've had the great fortune of traveling a huge amount, and the thing that always is so abundantly clear to me is how similar we all are. I think it's really very important to celebrate and explore diverse cultural experiences, but I think what's equally important to note is that the truth of the human condition is so unifying. We're all so similar. We all are just on a spectrum of struggling or being on the right side of our own mental health journey. And to your beautiful point, Brett, if we're telling stories, it's all about the story of the human condition, which all just comes down to wherever we are individually or the character in a story on their own mental health journey. And so it's
Cool.
Very well put.
I think we could all go on talking forever with this.
We could.
It's an extraordinary conversation. I want to thank, well, everyone here, Zach and Charlie, Robert and Adia. Zach, I know that your involvement came from such personal loss, and I just want to thank you for transforming that into making an incredible difference. And again, thank you, all of you here, for sharing your experiences and your insights. This has been an incredible conversation.
All right, that was awesome. Also, I do want to do a quick shout out to Yost at Jazz Inc. for the amazing work on the Batmobile, the giant Batmobile. I don't know if you guys saw it, but it was this amazing giant Batmobile. Raised $100,000 for AFSP, really amazing, and it's incredible. And we are also always fundraising, so if at any time you want to just go to AFSP and make a donation, keeps everybody doing this incredible work. So I think that's really important. Also, we do have these incredible T-shirts. I just happen to have one. This Talk Away the Dark, Adam Foreman designed T-shirts, Ink to the People, and the proceeds go to AFSP. So go grab your shirt. Don't forget to do that. And there's going to be a bunch of links. I don't know if they're here or there or somewhere. Possibly this is a link.
Maybe it'll go sort of swimming around
That,
here in a cool motion. I
You
don't know.
know, yeah, so reach out if you need help, because there's someone, incredible people waiting to talk to you.
I'll also say, if you're struggling, you would go to 988. It's not all about raising money, although that all does go toward AFSP's loss support, education, advocacy, research, everything. But you don't have to donate money. You can get involved in other ways. Again, reach out to your local chapter and volunteer. Volunteering can be something like really, really lightweight, and it's just a way of connecting with people. I also want to thank the Art Center College of Design for making this day possible, and Vero for their support. I'm honored to announce that someone is matching the first $20,000 that is donated, so that's incredible. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for watching. Reach out to your AFSP chapter. Thank you for helping us talk away the dark.
Thank you.